All right, taking a peek at the steering wheel as well as the cluster screen of the Ford E-Transit. So starting off with the actual wheel itself, and then we're going to dive into the cluster screen and what all the different gauges are. So traditional Ford styling, we do just have our blue oval right in the middle of the wheel. One thing, I do wish that this made, it was a little bit different in the E-Transit. Maybe use some of the lighter blues that we're going to see on the outside of the vehicle. But I digress. Very similar to the rest of the Transit lineup, the E-Transit does have a manual adjusting steering wheel, so just in between our knees, and telescopic, so in and out, up and down. Once you've got that perfect position, all you're going to do, click, and then lock it back into place. So we're going to go off to, let's go with the sticks first. So stick on the left-hand side is going to be obviously for our blinkers, flash out high beams. There's a button on the tip of this stick, and that's going to be for our lane keeping system. So you can see in the cluster there, so it says that it's turned it on versus off. And then when it's on, there's a little icon right in the very bottom there, and that just lets us know that it's turned on. And this thing works 3 different ways. So way number 1, if you start to veer over into another lane without signaling, it's going to either nudge you back into your lane, it's going to give you a bit of a steering wheel shake, or it's going to do a mixture, just depending on how you have it set up. Stick on the right-hand side is going to be for our windshield wipers. Very straightforward. Now, we do have just regular cruise control in this E-Transit, but we do have the option for the adaptive cruise instead, which is our set it and forget it cruise. It's very straightforward to use, and it's not too far off from our regular cruise control system. So we would essentially just turn on, increase, decrease, 1 kilometer, 1 mile per hour at a time. We can cancel out. And then with the adaptive cruise, we would also have a button for a distance indicator. So how close or far do you want to be away from the vehicle that's in front of you? But if you want to watch a video on how the adaptive cruise system works, check down in the description of the video. We do have our volume buttons there, so we can either increase, decrease our volume. Very straightforward. We can mute out as well. Buttons along the very bottom here, we've got a few different ones. So these 2 are going to be to either change songs or radio stations. We can either hang up or answer a phone call. And then we've also got a voice command prompt. So when we push that button, see on the little cluster screen or on the media screen there, it's kind of opened up and it wants us to do something. So we can do a lot of things using the voice command prompt. So we'd be, let me just push it for you again to show you. So we'd be able to do things like change songs, radio stations, we can pair a phone, we can set the temperature and things like that as well, strictly using our voice. I definitely recommend getting the hang of how this system works. It's really useful to just be able to change songs, radio stations, etc. using your voice, rather than having to fiddle through the media screen there. And then as I mentioned, these ones are going to be for the cluster screen. But before we get there, one other thing is to point out this button. When we're connected to an iPhone or an Android, so whether that's over Bluetooth or Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, we can do a longer press and hold if we want to be able to use Google or Siri Assistant. So it's very straightforward. And as we start to move in a little bit, give you the ideal view. There we go. Perfect. All right. So what's going to happen is I'm just going to be using all the buttons off to the side here. So going up and down and then pushing the back forward buttons, etc. So starting off, we've got our main screen here and we can go up and down between different views. So we've got navigation, AM, FM, etc., basic settings, but starting off, we've got our trip counter. So if we push the little button along the side, that's going to give us our trip 1, 2. We can reset values as well. We've got our EV driving history reset. We've also got our configure view. So if we go to configure view, we can add in different subscreens or take different ones out as well, or just bring it back to the factory default instead. Going back, we are on just our main trip 1 counter. So if we press and hold the OK button on the bottom right, so we see there, just press and hold. And that's going to reset all of our values. So we're right back down to 0 again. That's the same for trip 1, trip 2 counter, whatever the case may be. Moving back down, we've got our My View, and this one is where we've got obviously our digital speedometer. But if we hop inside, it can be a trip counter instead, our trip audio, or just a base calming screen. So if you find it to be a bit too much, we can just set up your My View for a calming screen instead. I personally prefer having the digital speedometer in there though. If you want to know how to change the kilometers and miles, or kilometers I should say, to miles and things like that, it's all done through that Sync Media screen. If you want to walk through how that screen works, check down in the description of this video. But moving back down, we've also got our driver assistance settings. and series of different ones. So we can toggle our traction control system on or off. Pre-collision assist. So if the vehicle senses that there's a potential collision, it's going to actively brake for us, or if we deselect, nothing will happen. And then how sensitive is it to a potential collision? Lane keeping system, that's what I was telling you about that we could hit on the left side of the steering wheel. So it's going to be the alert, where it's going to give us a little bit of a steering wheel shake. The aid, where it's actually going to recenter us and pull us back into our lane if we're not signaling. And then the alert and the aid are going to do both. The intensity of the shake, and then the sensitivity to whether or not it's going to shake or activate that system for us. The driver alert system. So if we start to veer over too many times without signaling, eventually a message is going to come up telling us we should probably take a break. Moving back, we've got our navigation. Popping inside, because we do have factory navigation inside of this one, we can look at my home, previous destinations, favorites, point of interest icons. So if you want to be able to locate a charger, because we're in the E-Transit, we've got that flexibility. We've got ATMs and restaurants and things like that. So very straightforward. So let's just say if we want to go to Papa John's, there we go.
Obey traffic laws. Be alert and use voice commands while driving.
And very
Drive to highlighted route.
and very useful because we can see right inside of our cluster screen the direction that we need to be taking. We just press again if we want to. We can cancel the route, and you're set to go. Moving back down, we've also got FM. We can push again to move to AM if we want to, or look at our different presets. And presets are all set up right through the media screen. But it's kind of neat. We can flip through this way instead, and then we can jump up, like I said, to AM, FM. We do have the option for Sirius XM inside of this, but this screen doesn't have it as a default. And then if we were hooked up through a phone, that would potentially show up as an available audio source as well. Moving down, we've also got our phone. No phone currently connected, but you'd be able to do things like look at calls, make calls, and things like that. And honestly, I just recommend using the voice command prompt anyways. And then a series of different settings. So we've got some basic information about seatbelts and who is currently in the vehicle. Do they have their seatbelts on? Yes or no? Moving back, we've got our display. So we can change out our language. So that's either English, Spanish, or French. We can change out our measurement units. So do we want to go kilowatts per 100, miles, etc.? Temperature units, Celsius, Fahrenheit. How do we want to measure our tire pressure? And back, we've got again our driver assistance settings, which we've already seen. Our vehicle settings, so we've got our chimes. So whether or not that pops on when we turn the vehicle on. We've got our lighting, so our auto high beam. With our high beams on, if the vehicle senses that there's somebody oncoming, it's going to automatically dim them for us and then bring them right back up again. Versus our auto lamp delay, when we go to lock the vehicle, do the lamps stay on for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 120 seconds, or do they just turn off automatically? And back from there, we've also got our locks. So we've got our auto unlock when we park the vehicle, feedback chirps and things like that. And global unlock means that all doors become unlocked when we press the unlock button on the key fob. Emergency tow, remote start. So the fob here doesn't have remote start built in, but we do have the flexibility of remote starting through our phone. And when we remote start, what do we want to have happen? Do we want to have the vehicle automatically determine what the temperature should be, or is it based off of our last settings? Do we want it running for 5, 10, or 15 minutes? Or if we remote start, we can turn the whole system off completely if we never want a remote start. We do have our SOC alerts there as well. So if we're speeding a little bit, and then we've got our wipers. So our wipers, courtesy wipe, if we've got our windshield wipers going, and then what it's going to do is run through the full cycle. With the courtesy wipe at the end, it's going to go one more time to get rid of any excess liquid. And then our rain sensing wipers. We've also got our vehicle maintenance, so our tire pressure, so we can see what's going on with the current tire pressure. A little bit wonky, so I would definitely make sure to balance this out a tiny little bit. And that is all for our settings. Moving down back to our trip counter. So very straightforward moving through the cluster. Now, along the very bottom screen, actually, we'll start off easy. So we're going to go off to the right side, and that's just our speedometer. So we've got kilometers and miles that are showing. We've got what gear we're currently in. So as we switch out, drive modes, etc., it's going to easily adjust there. Along the right-hand side, that's how much of the high voltage battery we have left. We also have our power gauge. And then we've got our total power gauge there as well. So how much power is currently being used when we're using the accelerator. But as we start using up more power, it's going to adjust the gauge as we go. So if we're flooring it, if we're towing heavy, or if we're pulling heavy loads inside of our cargo area, etc. That's going to adjust what's going on with the gauge there as we go. So it's not moving because I'm not moving, but you're going to see it adjust on the fly as you go. We've got a few other things that we're looking at along the very top, the bottom, etc. So along the very top, that's the current distance that we've traveled, so full distance. We've also got our current temperature, and then we've got how many kilometers are currently left based off of our current charge. So as of right now, I'm a little over half, but I am just sitting here. I've got currently 90 kilometers remaining in the charge cycle. But I know quite a little bit, but that's everything that you need to know about the steering wheel as well as the cluster screen inside of the E-Transit.